Patience. It's good to see everybody this morning. Council, anything before we start? Gil, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Anything before we start? Okay. Carlos, I guess you're it.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Thank you for being here this morning for our third budget workshop of the FY25 budget prep season. Last month, if you recall, the first workshop, we talked about the general fund, and we talked about the specifics, the sort of meat and potatoes of the fund. We have not changed anything regarding the items in the budget from that first workshop. So today, what I'd like to do is really provide you more of a 30,000-foot view of the budget process, and also a strategic analysis of where we're going over the next 2 or 3 years. We've been aided to do that also in this time period because now the City of Tampa and the county have also released their budgets. And if you read their budget documents or transmittal letters, you'll see a lot of the same challenges, headwinds that they're encountering, we're also facing. So we're going to have that conversation at any point. If you have any questions of me, just let me know, and I can stop it and clarify any items. Before we get going, I just want to remind the public of the remaining budget schedule. So today we are doing, again, the general fund strategic overview. On Thursday, we will have another workshop dedicated to the special revenue and enterprise funds. Last month, we weren't able to provide the detail that we wanted. We didn't have it in time yet, but we will have that for this Thursday. On Tuesday, the council will be setting the millage rate, and then on September 3rd, we'll have the first reading and first public hearing of the budget document. And on the 17th, the second reading and the second public hearing, hopefully the budget adoption that same evening. Now, thinking about the budget, I think it's always important you can't look at any given year in a vacuum. We have to look at it as part of a long-term plan, kind of like a strategic plan, right? So if you've done strategic planning, you start out with this called a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think that's really helpful for this exercise here today. So if you look at our strengths, I think our number one strength are our people, our city staff. We've got a lot of great staff, and that's thanks in large measure to the investment that you've allowed us to make in wages and competitive benefits for our staff. That goes hand in hand with an emphasis on performance. We have a lot of people who are performing at much higher abilities than we ever had in this organization. We have a lot better accountability also, and that's continuing to improve over time. Another strength we have here is we have a very limited debt burden. I'm actually very happy to say that this year's budget includes the last payment on the golf course loan, which will leave us basically with one debt instrument, which is the CRA loan, again, which is at a very low interest rate. So we're in great stead in terms of our debt capacity. And the council also knows that we've done a lot to create a robust, I'm calling it a capital reserve fund in our unassigned fund balance. There's a lot programmed to this year's budget from that fund balance. And in the future, again, it's an ability for us, rather than necessarily having to defer projects or fund projects through debt, we have to pay interest. In this case, we're able to pay as we go. In terms of weaknesses, we're a small city geographically. We're about 8 square miles. And of that 8 square miles, most of it is built out. So we don't have the ability to grow our tax base the way other communities in other parts of the country might be able to. So that's definitely a challenge. And of the areas that we have developed, we really don't have that diverse commercial industrial base that we would want in an ideal situation. So a lot of our commercial areas, 56 or in Fowler, for example, are neighborhood retail, right? Neighborhood retail, you don't have no one's going to drive from South Tampa to go to our stores here. It's not usually how it works. We don't have that regional draw. In an industry, we don't have the big industrial park. We have an industrial park in the area we annexed several years ago in the southeast part of our community. But again, not to the magnitude or quality that you'd expect if you really want to bolster that tax growth. In terms of opportunities, it's always been my stance since I started here at the city that USF is probably the biggest asset we can have as a sort of region. The fact that they're right next door to us, I always like to say that we're really their hometown, not Tampa. So that's incredible for energy and customers, for our businesses, et cetera, but also importantly, in terms of real estate development. USF is really playing a bigger role in that area. They've got a plan in place that they've talked about now for the last year or so to develop the Claw property off of 46th and Fletcher. The county's also looking to develop the Mosey property, the property around Mosey, I should say. Those two developments, if they come to fruition, will be win-wins for the city of Temple Terrace because they're going to be right there at our doorstep. Investors will be looking at this area with a newfound scrutiny, so they'll want opportunities to invest, and so we're going to be the next logical choice. Also, if you think about all the people moving to this mixed-use development, they might be renting, they might want to buy a home, and obviously Temple Terrace is a great community of single-family homes. So there's a lot of great upside to that area. Another area that kind of ties into a way to address our weaknesses is annexation. In case the community is not aware, our utility service area, which is where we provide water and sewer services, is far bigger than our corporate limits as a city. Our utility service area goes almost to 301 on the east side of our community. So we have a plan in place, a loose plan at least, of potentially annexing most of that area over time. And so we need to focus on that to address some of our challenges. I will tell you, though, our staff they're spread pretty thin right now, so having them gear up and do annexation as well will be a little bit of a challenge in and of itself. But I believe what we're going to end up doing is probably creating a staff task force to really focus on this over the next year and try to map out how we're going to get this accomplished. And again, the last two opportunities are reflective of our strengths. Again, that limited debt burden and that capital reserve allows us to be nimble, to respond to opportunities that might come about. Now let's talk about threats. Not to be bad neighbors, I have the city of Tampa as our number one threat here. City of Tampa is great, being close to City of Tampa as well, because obviously they've done a great job redeveloping Channelside, Water Street, that whole area, Midtown. There's a lot of cool things that Tampa has done, which makes this region a great place to live. But organizationally, Tampa, being an entity, I believe they have about 5,000 employees. When they make a decision, the butterfly effect is like a tsunami, and it wipes, it affects all of us. And being that we're a small city right next to them, it really affects us disproportionately. When Mayor Castor made changes to how much Tampa pays its public safety officers a couple of years ago, and then spread it out to the rest of its general employees, that impact had significant consequence for the city of Temple Terrace. And in fact, regionally, I was just speaking with a colleague last week, and they were saying how Orange County right now is in negotiations with one of their unions, and the city of Tampa is the forefront of their negotiations. It's come up over and over again. So as far as Orlando, basically, that's how far this tidal wave of change has gone because of what Tampa has done. So we know what they've done in the past. Any decision they make in the future, again, could impact us, and we can't control that. We just need to be able to be in a good position to react to it. And so, unfortunately, that is a continued threat for us. Another threat is every legislative session up in Tallahassee. When session starts, I think we all start chewing down our fingernails, wondering what's going to happen, what's going to come out of that session in terms of either preemptive action or an unfunded mandate. Over the last several years, we've had to respond to a number of these things, and I imagine that will continue to happen. The CIT, the Community Investment Tax, I want to thank the Hillsborough County Commission for putting it on the ballot this year. Hopefully it will be renewed. If the CIT is not renewed, and we've talked about this extensively here, that will mean a dramatic impact on our budget. Right now, we are generating about $2 million a year in revenue, and we spend almost $2 million a year in capital investment because of the CIT. If the CIT were renewed, it would be about $53 million over the next 15 years of that renewal period. So again, huge amount of money. If we had to make up $2 million, and let's say to give you an equivalent on the millage rate, $2 million would be about 2/3 of a full mill on our city's tax rate. So it's a pretty significant amount. And then the final threat is one that is regional in nature, which is property values are cooling off. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So let's look at our ad valorem tax revenue. You'll see over time, this basically illustrates sort of how the market has been doing very, very well. In 2019, we were generating about $10.7 million in ad valorem tax revenue. And in 2025 for the budget, we are programming about $18.9 million. So it's about a $8 million or so increase in ad valorem revenue. If I were to extrapolate out that line and just project what it would be going forward, it would probably be much flatter. I don't think it's going to necessarily come down, but it's definitely going to flatten out. Now, it could come down if we had a significant recession. Hopefully that won't happen. but it's going to flatten out. So we're going to see growth numbers, which I would imagine in the future. We might get a blip a year here or a year there if there's a big building that comes online. But I think if you look out 3 or 5 years, we're probably going to have growth, so maybe 3%, 4%, something like that. This past year, when we presented you the June budget, we were basing it on a 6.1% growth number that the property appraiser had given us. I'll be honest, that 6.1% growth number already initially was a little disappointing. We had hoped it would be slightly higher. Unfortunately, what happened was between that June workshop and then the June number from the property appraiser and the July number the property appraiser gave us, there was a drop. There was about a $32 million loss of value, and our number came in at 5.3%, which our staff had never experienced that with a number going down. So we've had several calls with people in the property appraiser's office to understand what happened. The best explanation that we've gotten so far is that there was a delay in getting information from the Value Adjustment Board, and that information typically would be included in the June estimate, so it would have all been calculated in there. They didn't get it for the June estimate. They only got it in time for the July estimate. Unfortunately, they didn't tell us that this was happening, so we were quite blindsided by it. But we've made changes in our budget to adapt to this. We haven't cut any of the programmed elements in the budget, and we'll talk about that shortly. Mentioned a second ago about how property values are cooling off. So, and there's definitely different trends in this calculation. So 2 weeks ago, Finance Director Ingram and myself, we had the opportunity to be on a conference call with the appraiser's director of its tax roll. And we asked him, what's the forecast? What are you seeing in the marketplace? He said the following. He said, commercial is trending downward. In fact, I think the terminology was it's in a downward spiral. That was probably already starting to happen right before the pandemic. People online purchasing has really taken impact. Imagine during a pandemic, everybody's cooped up. What were they doing? They were ordering everything online. People got used to doing that. You come out of the pandemic, there's also staff shortages, which only exacerbate issues for commercials. So that has been going downward. Also, office product is included in this, and office product is still not recovered, particularly in our part of the county. So we're on the eastern, sort of quote-unquote, northeastern end compared to Tampa. So data centers, things like that, which would sort of be our bread and butter for like the telecom park facility, that is something now that companies have just farmed out to their employees to do from home. So you're seeing that shift. Areas such as like the downtown in Tampa, where they have done creative things and they've marketed and tied to amenities, those have had some success. But again, it's not the same amount of office product. So there's still a lot out there that's vacant. In terms of residential, there's a mixed approach to residential right now. Single family homes are still appreciating. But if you follow the trend, it used to be like this. It was overheated, the market, so everything was going up in terms of prices. If you tried to buy a home, you knew this. That is now cooling off, so that's probably flattening out that curve. A multifamily, however, is declining, and apparently there's been a pretty dramatic decline in the value of multifamilies or apartment complexes. The best explanation given for that is that apparently during the heyday of low interest rates, a lot of multifamily apartment complex owners refinanced their complexes, and a lot of those payments are now coming due. It's in balloon payments now, and trying to get refinancing now where the rates are much higher, 4 or 5 percentage points higher than they were before, is a disincentive. So a lot of investors are skittish of investing in multifamily right now. The numbers don't work for them. So that's creating a decline in value for those properties. And as you all know, we have several of these. So if you look at Temple Terrace Highway or CRA, out in Fowler, and also Morris Bridge, we have a number of these apartment complexes. So those are not doing as well as they historically have done. The one bright spot in terms of property values is industrial. Industrial is appreciating significantly. So if you were to rent industrial space, like manufacturing space or distribution center, warehouse space, if you were to rent it anywhere probably on the U.S. East Coast 3 or 4 years ago, you were probably paying between $4 and $6 a square foot. If you try to rent that same space here in the Tampa Bay region today, you're probably paying between $13 and $16 a square foot. If you try to rent that same space in Miami, you're paying $30 a square foot. To have you understand what that means, $30 a square foot would have been a high-end mall rent for a retailer several years ago, and now it's industrial. And there's a combination of factors affecting this. In my estimation, there's been onshoring. So the pandemic hit, there's a move to onshore industry because we saw the disruption in supply chain. So companies decided, well, rather than be in China or wherever they were, they decided to come back. And you're bringing new uses back, or not new uses, but historically they had been uses, but then the geography had changed. You're bringing them back now. There's limited land area, particularly in Florida. And so the supply and demand, so the costs now are going up significantly. So from a value perspective, for a community, that's great if you have a lot of industrial. In our case, we have a very limited supply, so we don't necessarily we probably won't see a lot of return on this over the next couple of years, unless we pick up more of these industrial areas. Now, another big generator of revenue for the cities, for the general fund, is interest earnings. This is a very interesting chart because, again, it's just fascinating to me. I'm not an economist, but I like seeing how changes at the global level affect us at the local level, and you can clearly see that here. So in 2021, you see from this chart, we were generating about $86,000 in interest. In 2025's budget, we have $1.8 million in interest projected. How does that happen? Well, if you recall what was happening between 21 and 22, the inflation was starting to take off. The Federal Reserve put the brakes on that by increasing the Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate today is about 5.25 to 5.5%. Been following this and figuring out, okay, when is that rate going to stop or going to come down? They are projecting, and these are people trying to read the same tea leaves we're all trying to read, and so there's disparate information here, but best I could tell is that if there's going to be another reduction in the rate, it would probably happen maybe as early as September, maybe another one in December, maybe a quarter point each, maybe not. Again, this is still speculation out there. Eventually, the Fed wants to get to about 1.25% to 2% by the end of calendar year 2026, which would be our fiscal year 27. So that will have an impact. Another thing that's influencing this peak here is the great work that Mr. Ingram and the Finance Department has done. So they took the direction from City Council a couple of years ago to really look at how we invest our money, making sure our money is invested obviously in safe instruments because we're regulated. We can't just put it in stocks and bonds and things like that. But they've shopped around our money to find best rates of return for us. So they've moved things around. That's helped our budget tremendously as well. But despite all that, if the interest rates start to drop, what you're going to see on this chart will it'll be like a cliff or like a roller coaster. We'll use the Busch Gardens analogy. So it's going to go up. It's going to start to come down again. Will it get down to as low as 85,000? I don't know. Hopefully what Jim's doing is going to help deflect some of that reduction, but it's definitely, going to come down. Now, at the same time, so we talked about the revenue side of the house, and you saw everything was going up, and then it started to come down or taper off. Personnel services is going up. So personnel services, the image here, everything has to do with our people. So this is wages, the benefits, fringes, payroll tax, etc. And this is also kind of the legacy of what we've done as a concerted effort here as part of the City Council and City Administration. So in 2019, we were investing about $20.7 million in personnel services in our general fund. In 2025, in this current budget we're proposing to you, that number has increased to 29.7. So a $9 million increase in our people. This number, unlike the other numbers, is probably not going to come down. It would come down if the council decided that we needed to cut services. I'm not proposing that or saying that's going to happen, but if that's where you want it to go, if we had to control that would be one scenario where that would have to occur. But I just want the community to know, look, we've made a major concerted investment in our people to make sure that we stay competitive as an organization, which has been important, particularly in this region. So if you take the personnel investment and you take all the other operating investment that we do, so buying fuel, paying for paper clips, everything we do as part of the general fund, you can see how it breaks out here on this particular pie chart. I want to make sure the council understands this pie chart is exclusive of the use of assigned or unassigned fund balance, because you might see in your backup the numbers they'll be different, because when we calculate the use of those unassigned or assigned fund balances, it goes into the general fund. Here I extrapolate that out because that's mostly capital. So this is basically our day-to-day, our bread and butter. So if you look at this, you see that over 59%, nearly 60% of our general fund budget is an investment in public safety. And that's been pretty consistent. I mean, we spend most of our dollars on police and fire. And then you see after that, basically you have administration, leisure services, public works, et cetera. So, but the bulk again is in public safety.
Carlos, what's non-administration? What's an
So
example?
non-administration would be like community development. So administration is sort of your internal support department, so executive, finance, HR, IT. Non-administration would be like community development where they have external, they face the external part of the community. And code, yes, thank you. So that's included in that as well. So we've talked about what we do, what we invest in, and we've managed to do that by not raising, through not raising the millage rate. So as far back at least until 2019, our millage rate was 6.555. And in 23, again, if you recall the chart about the ad valorem tax rate increase, that was the year that Amazon came on the books. There was a significant increase. Council felt comfortable reducing the millage rate. We have stayed at 6.45 for the last 2 fiscal years. We are proposing to stay at that millage rate. So the FY25 budget does not contemplate any millage rate increase. And it's to see how that places us in the marketplace. So you see here, we have all the sort of municipal jurisdictions, including the county's municipal services jurisdiction. So Tampa is at 6.2076. Last year, recall, Tampa the mayor proposed a 1 mil increase. That was shot down by the city council. They had, in my estimation, the mayor had to do that because of all the increases she had given in salary the year prior. That was not accepted by the council. This year, under the budget that's been submitted, my understanding is that there is not a millage increase proposed. So I would imagine this would stay at the same number unless through the budget process they decide to change that. But if you read the mayor's comments when she submitted the budget, she indicated it's going to be a struggle. There's going to be, because she's seeing the same headwinds we are. Their growth number, if you recall, we talked about the property appraisers changing their estimate. Well, that was $32 million for us. For them, I imagine it was significantly more. And I know for a fact, in talking with some of you that have talked to them, to the sort of the staff over in Tampa, that they were rocked by what happened, and so they've had to make some adaptation to that. So they're gonna have a struggle on their hands. City of Plant City, their number here, the 5.7, I will tell you it's the fiscal 24 number. I looked for their fiscal 25 budget. It's not online yet, so I wasn't able to update that. So right now I'm using the assumption that they're going to stay steady at 5.7, but they could increase it potentially. The county did increase their millage in the unincorporated parts of their service area. So what the county did is kind of interesting. They did what they're calling a millage swap. So if you get your tax bill, you'll see that if you live in the city of Temple Terrace, you pay the county. You pay a portion of your taxes to the county. Let's call it we'll round up. We'll say it's about 5 mills. And that's for general county services. If you're the unincorporated part of the county, you pay that 5 as well, but you also pay for municipal services, the equivalent of city services to those residents. And what the county's done is it's taken basically 1/10 of a mil from the general across the county number and applied it and increased the unincorporated service number by that same amount. So they're calling it a wash. But it's just a way for them to account for the fact that they're providing a lot of services. And if you talk to folks at the county, I mean, the bulk of the population of Hillsborough County as a geographic entity is unincorporated. So they are strained. They're basically the largest city in the county by far. If you talk to them, they'll tell you, if Brandon could become a city, they would love it because it's, that it's basically set up to be its own city. It's just not the case. And so that's where they spend a lot of their county in dollars.
Carlos, can you go back to the previous slide for a second?
Yep.
Would it be too much trouble to get this same information but go back to 2015, 10 years?
We can do that.
And then maybe email this slide to the council?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
And this one, I just had a comment on that. I'm going from memory here, but every year I look pretty hard at the trim notice that comes out. And although we may have the highest municipal millage rate, if you look at Tampa's full tax burden. If you own a $300,000 home, your tax rate is higher every year than Temple Terrace because of the things that you pay that we don't pay here and so forth.
Correct. So there's, and we'll see it more so probably even with the enterprise funds, because there's different charges. What some municipalities will have, they might have a fire fee, they might have a library district fee, things like that. So when you run that calculation through, you're likely to catch other things. So the overall financial, if you're a resident in the city of Tampa, and your residence or you own property in the city of Tampa, residential property, you own a residential property here. This can be misleading because you have to consume water and sewer and those things.
Right.
And so when you sugar all that out, it's not if you're saving, I should say, because you live in Tampa, the difference is nominal at best. And in some respects, it actually might be a little higher by living there.
Councilmember?
Absolutely. You want to go up to the mic?
Yeah, while he's going up to the mic, I know City of Tampa and Hillsborough County pay a special library fee. It was .55 mil. So you add that on to City of Tampa right now, and they're higher than us.
Yeah, they're
That's
always
what I was
higher.
gonna say.
Okay, then stay down.
0.55.
Right.
93
Yeah.
this year.
The reason I think that's important for us to kind of dwell on that is because it's been rumored over the years that, oh my gosh, Temple Terrace has the highest millage rate. I've even heard it said we're the highest millage rate in the state of Florida. We're not even in the same universe as the highest millage rate in the state of Florida. That is not true. It has never been true. And yet that's still a pervasive myth that I hear repeated periodically in the community. That's not true. So anyway, there are cities that have way higher millage rates than we've ever even contemplated. So
Right. And I think it's important to also note that if you recall, when we talked about the property valuations, again, we don't have a lot of industrial. We don't have a lot of that high earning commercial as well, whereas Tampa does, or the county might, for example, or another community in Florida might as well. So the millage rate is also a ratio to that. So if we're a community that our tax base is not as strong, not because of any efforts on our part, things that we're not doing well, it's just the nature of it. We're small. So the millage rate has to factor in for that. Whereas, if you're a community that is flush with lots of, acres upon acres of industrial space, like a Plant City, for example. So let's talk about them for real quick. So they're at, right now, potentially 5.7. Who knows what they're going to be when they submit their budget. But if you look at Plant City, you see a lot of growth there, right? A lot of open land, a lot of distribution centers, warehouses, I imagine some manufacturing facilities, et cetera. So that is low service requirement for the city, high return on tax base. And so that allows them to do stuff like this, to keep that millage rate at that level. So again, we try to be cognizant of that. We try to always make sure that the millage rate is where we can keep it at the most low level possible. But the reality is we still are expected to provide services. And to provide services, we need to adjust for that. And so it's reflective of our tax base also.
well, and I'm sorry to belabor this, but this is important to the community, this millage rate discussion. And so the other thing I would point to in the community is we are less than 0.2 mills higher than Tampa, which is pretty negligible unless you own a $10 million home. And there's a marked difference, no offense to my friends in Tampa, but there's a marked difference between the levels of services in Temple Terrace and the community expectation here than there is in Tampa or unincorporated, or even Plant City for that matter. And just one example is we don't have potholes. Right, we get a pothole in the street, which happens in Florida, happens everywhere. We fix it, and we get too many potholes, and we repave the street. So the only potholes in Temple Terrace are on the county roads that run through Temple Terrace. They're not on our streets. We don't have potholes. Well, if you drive through Tampa, I'll just leave that alone there. But so the community expectation here of our police, our fire, our response times, our parks, the family recreation center, the number of parks and green space, neighborhood parks. We have more green space per capita. I mean, we're in the top tier of the state of Florida in that regard. So this slide doesn't really tell the full picture here. And so anyway, I'll leave that alone, but I think you get a good value for your taxes in Temple Terrace. I really think that.
Right, in fact, that's what when we talk to our staff, our leadership team, what differentiates the city, and the reason you can have a city our size is that we call it sort of the white glove service. I mean, you get services and responses in almost all instances that you're not gonna, I mean, I would never expect to call the city of Tampa with a complaint and have somebody, have the city manager or the director of public works call me personally, after hours, and that's things that we do here. And the elected officials, you all do it too. And I don't know if the elected officials in Tampa would do it, but I imagine it would be hard for me to believe that they would.
Some of them do.
Okay, some of them do, so I'll give credit then where it's due. But that's what we have to differentiate ourselves in because of our size. So we have to be nimble, we have to be high quality.
Mayor.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Right.
Just a comment for not necessarily doing this right this minute, but as we move forward in the budget process, I think it would be helpful if we had a comparison of not just the pure millage rate, but more the tax burden that might be placed on a resident in each city so that we're comparing more apples to apples. Because our millage rate is comprehensive in that we don't have any other small taxes. We don't have any community development taxing districts that, a homeowner might be added. So our millage rate is all inclusive basically, whereas some of the other jurisdictions have other fees or taxes, and I don't mean enterprise funds. I just mean just general budget usage, where they're paying. So really the cost of, I think that would give us a better comparison for the purpose of this particular discussion. It's basically, what's the full tax burden for that
You mean
resident?
beyond what the trim notice would tell you?
No, I mean, I think the trim notice is pretty comprehensive. Unless we're talking about fees that are outside of the trim notice, but I definitely don't mean the enterprise funds, sewer, water, that sort of thing.
If we can, I'm sorry.
Now, I had a question on trim notice. So trim notice wouldn't show street light districts.
It would be hard to capture all the CDCs
I
in
know.
here, because like Town and Country's got one and somebody else, I mean, it'd be hard to.
But Tampa may have, do they have a stormwater assessment citywide? Do we know?
City of Tampa, I do not think so.
Or they may have stuff, I know somebody has stuff like that. So when you add all that up, and I know it's hard because some have it, some don't.
I'm
But when
thinking more
you,
general.
yeah,
So we'll do some digging. I think what would be helpful, maybe it's a combination of things. I think we can definitely show and we just picked a couple of properties and putting this together. So if we find a property elsewhere that might be in a different district, that number, that trim notice might actually be slightly different. So we'll do a little bit more of a sample on the city of Tampa side. What we can also do, I think, would be one step further. I know you say keep the enterprise funds out, but I also would like to show a chart maybe that shows that sort of overall financial burden on a property owner, like a single-family home in Tampa versus Temple Terrace, something like that. So we'll think about that, and maybe we'll include that in the, we can get it to you beforehand, but we might even include it in the presentations in September.
Okay.
Okay, so as we've talked about here, we had that change in the property appraiser's valuation, so we did adjust to that. I mentioned we did not cut out any of the services that we had proposed in the FY24, FY25 budget, but obviously we had a gap. So to address this gap, we did a few things. And I want to give all the credit to Mr. Ingram and his team, because when I say we, it's him. Him and his team, they're the ones that really came up with these ideas. So sanitation fund, let's talk about that. Last year, if you'll remember, the sanitation fund was in tough shape. It was significantly bleeding money, and we had to find ways to address it. One of the ways to address it, to make sure that we had a rate increase that was reasonable and not the original 10%, which is when we started these workshops, we were looking at that a year ago, is we stopped making an overhead payment to the general fund from the enterprise fund from sanitation. So for the public, who may not be, who don't deal with municipal fund accounting, it is very, very common in municipal fund accounting for when you have an enterprise fund, which is a business, basically business enterprise way of accounting for your dollars. That fund is being provided services from other departments in the general fund. For example, executive, finance, HR. All those entities interact with that sanitation fund. So because of that, enterprise funds will pay a portion back to the general fund. Again, very common practice. Last year, we stopped doing that. We put it on pause in an effort to stem the financial or improve the financial condition of the fund. And that was before we hired Jason. We hired Mr. Warrenfeltz in the late summer. And Mr. Warrenfeltz came on, and one of the things that he started to do was just look at all of this and try to unravel it all. As I've reported here before, he's made incredible inroads in picking up new accounts, tightening up our just the finances as a whole. So because of that, the sanitation fund is doing much better. You'll see this Thursday than it was projected to be doing at this point. So in light of the fact we had this drop, we went back and we looked at this and we said, you know what, can we afford to pull these dollars, this overhead charge from the sanitation fund? Jim felt confident we could, so we have restarted that contribution in this budget now to again address this gap that we had. Another thing we did is in the first budget workshop, we talked about, we always have assumptions as to how our revenues will do. And we assumed that a lot of our revenues were going to be a 2% increase, which was a very, very conservative number. What Jim was able to do in the month since was we had more data now, we could see more trend analysis, and he felt very comfortable upping our interest number. Despite the fact the interest rate's going to drop at some point, he still felt conservatively that we could increase what we had projected in interest. So he did that as well, and that helped, again, bridge the gap. And the final thing was we had to reduce the contribution to the unassigned fund balance. If you recall, it was budgeted about $46,000 or $50,000 or so, I believe, was going into unassigned fund balance in the original draft. Well, that's now going to be zero. That's budgeted. Doesn't mean that if we have savings because we have vacancies, things like that at the end of the year, that we may not have an actual practical contribution to unassigned fund balance. That could happen, but we're not budgeting for it. Any questions on that?
Gil, any questions?
No, I have no questions.
Okay.
Everything sounds consistent.
I want to close with just some takeaways. So just, again, to leave folks with the understanding, look, ad valorem, what are we seeing? So ad valorem, again, the valuation is slowing. The Fed rate is going to decrease, and hopefully we will not lose the CIT. Another area that we've touched upon slightly in this presentation, but we want to focus a little bit here, is also contractual demands. Last year, we reopened the police contract in light of, again, the disparities caused by the city of Tampa. I think it was the right thing to do, but it came at a cost, so there's a significant cost increase to the city's budget. This year, we're negotiating with the fire union. We have included what we think is the appropriate offer in the budget for FY25. But those demands, those are increasing our personnel services and increasing, not only that, from a global perspective, it's doing that, but on a per employee perspective, the contractual demands are creating what we're looking to. Hopefully it won't create this, but we're very cognizant of making sure that we don't have inequities in our organization. We don't want to have a disparity between staff. I value all the employees. All 328 employees of the city of Temple Terrace are important. So I want to make sure that other people aren't falling behind because their positions may not be in these police or the fire unions, for example. So we're very concerned about that. As we've mentioned to the council before, you've allowed us to do, we make strategic changes where if we find that we have issues, for example, with recruitment or retention, or the marketplace is just changed. If we have to make strategic changes, we will continue to do that. And at some point next year, for example, in the future, I think it's still going to be important to make sure that our employees are still compensated moving forward, all our employees potentially, to avoid those discrepancies. So just want to leave you with that and take any questions.
Council, questions?
Yes.
Yes, Councilmember Fernandez.
Okay. I have a couple questions. So with regard to the investment income that you've predicted, in the last year and the year before, I think we had a higher fund balance, which we will be pulling down in order to fund some of our capital projects. How much will that impact our investment income?
It's a very good question, which I have considered. I wouldn't expect it to pull down like immediately, because the timing of the payments from the unassigned fund balance, it's going to take time to get projects going and certain things spent. With that being said, one of the moves we recently made was to move a good chunk of money to a much higher interest rate through the Florida Safe. It's one of the local government investment pools, which generally makes good interest. Now, we do know that there will probably be some drop. I think what we have budgeted, though, is still conservative based on what our return is now. It's, even though we're projecting a year-end estimate of 1.8 million, looking at the latest numbers, I think it's going to be higher this year. But, so I think what we budgeted next year has all of these factors in consideration. I think it's still a good, safe number. Obviously, we will have to keep monitoring all of that. And we still, one last point, we are also right now looking at some term rates that we can lock in before interest rates go down that will be higher than our money market rate with the PNC, which is where we hold our main funds.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But it is a good question, and it is definitely a consideration, because as time goes by, that is going to affect the return.
So this question, I think, is for the city manager, and that is, since industrial is becoming a higher demand area for property, is there a way that we can change any designation for existing property? I'm thinking of Telecom Park, that there are some areas that industrial warehousing might be suited, being some of it's farther away from residential areas. Would that require rezoning to allow something like that?
It probably would. So the telecom it was a development of regional impact. So there's a master plan for telecom. So I don't believe there's probably some elements of industrial, that maybe some light industrial that might be okay in that park, because we do have some of that. We see Baycare, for example.
Right.
But heavy industry would probably require some comprehensive plan amendments and changes to that master plan as well. I think we want to also be careful, because where commercial property it's very cyclical, right? So things are low now, but then 5 years from now there'll be a different trend, and then one segment which was low now will start to take off again.
Right.
And such. So I don't think you want to sacrifice. I think you'd want to be careful if you want to, because once you put, let's say, if you put some heavier industry in that park, it could change the makeup of that park or the character of that park. That is that is one of our prized sort of areas in this community. I think right now it's just it's doing okay. It's not doing it like it did in the past, just because of sort of the global economy. But I think if you wanted to say now we're gonna, hey, let's develop and just have like these little shops where guys can fix transmissions and things like that, that's not going to be the kind of return you're going to want anyway.
No, I was thinking more like light industrial, low impact warehousing, that kind of thing. Not at all heavy industrial.
And that might be okay. So I'd have to talk with our planning staff and figure out if something like that would work. We've had different interest in Telecom Park. There's one or two parcels in Telecom which right now are still vacant. We've had interest for, at one point. So this is also indicative of how these things are cyclical. So a year or 18 months ago, we had a party that came in and they wanted to do multifamily apartments. And that was like the thing. That's what they were going to do, multifamily apartments. And that's definitely not in the cards for that park, because that would create a whole lot of issues to put it right in the middle of all the business parts of the park. And now you look, we're 18 months later, and that the bottom's fallen out of that marketplace. And now people are looking to talk about industrial. And so you can't, I think if we're going to make changes, we need to really think conservatively and not just respond to the trend.
Which I'm just asking what kind of options we might have into the future, because we don't have a lot of industrial space, and just to give us a well-rounded tax base. But I'm not proposing that we go ahead, jump in and start making big changes, but I'm thinking more of maybe creating some designation that there's multiple uses that property could have. But I'm not suggesting we jump and do that. Then my last question is about the housing, our housing stock, our housing market. And yes, the market value for homes is declining. Not necessarily large numbers, but it is declining a little bit. But we have so many houses that have been held for so long that, I mean, I could use myself as an example. We bought our house in 1996. Even though the value is declining from where it was last year, if I sell my house today, it's still a huge increase over what I paid in 96. Is there a way to look at what has been held long-term that, I guess, is that factored into our valuation and estimate that we get from the property appraiser, meaning that some of these houses, yes, the overall value may be declining, but somebody who bought a house 25 years ago is going to pay, they're going to sell it, and that's going to come onto our property rolls at a higher value. Is that factored into this estimate that we get from the property appraiser?
So I don't know if the I don't think the property appraiser is doing predictions in terms of going forward as to who might sell, or I don't think that's calculated in. I think they're actually looking at, I would imagine what they're doing is looking at actual sales data. Our community is not very large, so there's not a whole lot of sales, so they might have to pull comps from other comparable areas sort of in the region. And they're making, some predictive, I guess there's some projection of that in terms of a growth number for single family, again, based on actual sales. The other part of this to keep in mind is that with the homestead exemption here in the state of Florida, it does basically cushion the growth, the value growth of anybody if you have homestead protection on your property. I think it's 3% is the max today. They tried to change it to 2%. So that already kind of, so the existing homes, the people who like yourself who've owned a house since 96, it's like you're not really adding tremendously to this growth number.
Right. My growth is 3%.
Right.
Versus if I were going to sell it today, the growth would be much higher.
Right. You need to sell your house, so that's what
value.
Right. Yeah. So that really hasn't factored in a whole lot. Am I seeing anecdotally? Are we seeing more houses for sale? I think there probably are more houses for sale today than there might have been a year ago. Maybe that's because more houses are staying on the market a little bit longer because interest rates are higher now. So there's a little bit of that. But the Temple Terrace market is still kind of still somewhat unique in the sense that, I get these flyers. You probably all have received these flyers from realtors, and they say, here's this house sold in 1 day, this house sold in 2 days. And so it seems like things are still moving pretty quickly. But there has to be some moderation in that behavior just because of the interest rates. I can't imagine that hasn't had some impact.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to know how the basis of the calculation and if that was included somewhere in the calculation. So that's it from me.
Council members? Yes.
I got 3. We used to have, and we still may have, annexation agreements with properties, especially in the 301 industrial area. Do we still have some outstanding that are contiguous that we're working on?
In fact, Mayor and I were just talking about one. So we are looking at that. it hasn't been a focus yet, I'll be honest. I mean, there's been other things that we've been working on, so we haven't had a focus on this. But now, in fact, we have been looking. There's one property, for example, the Marathon property on Temple Terrace Highway is one that was recently brought to our attention that does have an agreement in place to annex once it's contiguous, which in fact it is contiguous today. So we're going to be, as part of this annexation task force that I mentioned that we're going to have to convene, probably going to be looking at some of these agreements writ large in the city and find out, what right now is, if there are triggers that have already been activated that we need to follow up on. That would make it easier, I would think, if there's already those agreements in place versus us having to proactively go out and try to find areas to annex.
Okay, thank you. The second one, the property at the end of Rollerson Ranch Road, our water reclamation property that we sold, has there been any indication, have they started anything on their design or any of that?
So they, in fact, their deadline for submitting information to us was this past week, and they've reached out to Greg. So this is actually a great example of the market, the global marketplace impacting a local development. So they originally were going to do a trade school. Trade school market really wasn't there; it was saturated. So then they decided they wanted to do apartments, multifamily apartments. We brought that to the council. Then they realized the multifamily market is dead right now. So now they've changed to condominiums. So they have a similar plan in terms of units, but they want to build condos. So Greg is working with them to because they have to provide us with some sketches of what this will look like to bring to council. We will likely have to have an amendment back to you because now they're changing that. We also have to figure out a way to monitor for the affordable housing component that was included. Originally, it was 10% of the rental units, which there's a way to monitor that. But once you sell a condo, that's going to be a different animal that I'm not sure how to address. But we're going to reach out to the county's housing folks and see if there's a way that they've done it. So that's still in the works.
Okay, thank you. My last question, are you happy with what you just presented us?
I have a question.
Okay. Well, I don't know. You got to tell me if you're happy with it. It's more
Gil,
important.
hold on, let him answer,
I wanna
James, and
know
I'll
if
call
you're
you
I
next.
want to know if you're happy.
So if I'm happy, I think we have a solid budget. I was happy about the budget in June when I presented it to you. I still think it's a good budget. I think we're making some positive changes. It's still conservative in nature. Am I concerned about the future? Absolutely. But right now, this budget, I think, is a solid budget presented to the council. I was dismayed by what the property appraiser, how that transpired. But thanks to the great team that we've got working in finance, I think we found a way to address it that doesn't affect the services that we wanted to bring to this community in FY25.
And you'll know my answer when it's time for comments, but right now, we're in questions.
Right.
So.
Okay, Gil, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry to step on whoever was talking.
That's all right.
I apologize. I do have one quick question, if you can hear me okay. The 5% differential on the collectability of our ad valorem taxes versus the statutory budgeting amount is approximately what? Any idea off the top of your head?
Did you get that? For the 5% difference between the statutory amount of collection and our budget.
Yeah.
Did you?
It is, yes, we put the 90.
Microphone, because he can't hear you.
Yes, the ad valorem in this budget is 95% as required statutory requirements. It's not the full 100%.
And about how much is that worth to the city?
Do you know how much that is, the actual amount?
I'm sorry, I do not have that off the top of my head. If I had a calculator handy, I might be able to figure it out in a few minutes.
We can get that to council.
That potentially is our collective.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. I don't know if you can hear, but Gil's saying that is potential additional revenue that we would receive because we're.
That money is potentially available for back in the reserve or to cover any differential.
Right.
Contract money we're talking about. I think that's something we got to keep in the back of our mind.
Right.
Going forward.
I believe we've already exceeded what we budgeted this year. for that very reason, because we have to budget 95%, and we usually get over 95%.
Exactly. So I think that we have to, you know, we took the funding of the reserve bureau in the budget, but I think that that's something that we keep in the back of our back pocket that we actually will end up, given the budget, given the thought going into our budget, I think that we will end up taking
Good point.
So, Carlos, I have a question. Couple questions, actually.
kind of like a question for Tom.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you, Gil. So, you said before about the pay raises in this, for the general employees. What were you thinking, 4% and then 2 for?
Correct. So it's, what we have programmed is a 4% sort of a cost of living adjustment, which would kick in on October 1. And then 2%, which is like we did last year for once they get their anniversary and they do a satisfactory performance evaluation.
Okay. Another question, and you don't have to do this now or predict this now, but some clarification on the country club loan, because you mentioned it. I don't want members of the public to be confused by that. So we may be reaching the end of the bank loan, but what has happened is the city has been paying the payments on the bank loan, and the country club theoretically has been paying the city. At times over the period of this loan, the country club has paid the city in full, and essentially the city has done a pass-through for that money to the bank. But other times, this country club has not been able to pay that, and we've been paying it anyway. And so the PNC loan may be done this year, but the debt from the country club to the city goes on for another decades at the rate they're paying. It goes on for another, I think, I don't know what the outstanding balance at the bank is, but I think they owe us like $2.6 million, don't they? A portion of that is still due to the bank. The rest of it's
So
repaying us.
exactly. So that our final, is it 259? Is it our final payment?
The final payment, yes.
So our final payment is 259,000 and change. But you're correct. They owe, but because they've been basically re-amortizing their schedule with different council actions over the past, and not only council action, but also action on their part, sort of unilateral action, they're going to owe us for quite some time.
Well, and that's what I want the public to understand. I don't want people who are country club members to go around and say, oh my gosh, thank goodness this year our obligation ends. No, their obligation goes on for the rate they're paying. They're going to be longer than anybody who's alive now, right? They're going to still be paying. So I don't want anybody to get excited from their perspective. They still owe a lot of money. And the question in this is, and I don't even really need to know the answer to this because you guys are smarter than me. I'm sure you've already looked at this. We're on the hook for that. We're co-signers on the loan, so we have to pay the bank even if they default, unfortunately. I don't know the interest earned scenario versus the interest paying out, I don't know what rate, and I don't even know if there's a prepayment penalty in this loan. Is it better for us to just pay this off and be done with it? Or is it better to just keep making the quarterly payments? Now that we're towards the end, I'm sure you've looked at that, but
We just have the one payment, right? Are we paying
I
it?
know some of that.
if there's only one payment, I guess it
It's
doesn't.
one
It's an annual pay, or twice a year payment, sorry, that we make. Or I may be confusing it with another. We do have one this year. It's paid at the end of the year. So we do have one this year, and I believe, I'd have to look back at the schedule, but I believe the last payment then would come at the end of fiscal year '25. And that's the one that we have, that we're budgeting to use unassigned fund balance. So that would be the last payment. But I will double check that in Thursday, make sure I have the correct answer on that.
The prepayment penalty is great. That's
Okay.
why this was negotiated this way.
Okay,
The city was on the hook for it and could not repay it. Pay it off in advance. It was not worth it.
Okay. And actually, one last thing, this isn't a question, this is a comment. We've had several discussions about industrial and annexation and things, and so city manager and I have talked about this a lot over, really, since you've been here. I guess we've been talking about it. And his talk about, and we talked about this during our strategic planning also, we've had several talks about, what are the possibilities? And this task force or committee that Carlos is talking about would kind of come back. What we, as a council, together with management, need to really kind of look at is forming a real plan, a real vision of where we could go. Some of that would include taking in property that's ripe for industrial or light industrial manufacturing, and that would be like along the 301 corridor. That 301 corridor between the 301 Industrial Park, which is almost already ours, over half, I guess, is ours, all the way up to Fowler is ripe. And if you look at the plans that DOT has for the improvements on 301 in the future, that is a major corridor between I-4 and Zephyr Hills and up into Pasco. So that is very desirable for industrial, light industrial kind of development, because you can get out and you can get to the port, you can get to the railways, you can get to the networks to get your goods out. There are some challenges that come with that, though, but we need to get together and talk about some of that. And one of the challenges that we've talked about with the 301 Industrial Park is those roads in there are not ours. They continue to be county roads. And if we continue to annex that, we're at the tipping point where the county's going to say, okay, well, if you want to take it, you got to take the roads. And those roads are currently in terrible shape. And so that would be a significant investment in redoing those roads. Because it's not just the roads, it's everything under the roads too. And it's heavy trucks out there, so that's not a cheap prospect. So, but we really need to, Carlos and I were talking about this just yesterday. I think we talked about it. We've done kind of a whack-a-mole approach to annexation over the years. Okay, we'll take that property, or we'll take that property, or we'll take that one, or whatever. We're going to have to do a little better with that if we're going to get out to the area. And that may include taking some areas that at first blush we may say, I don't know if we want that. But to cherry pick is very difficult. The county's not going to let you just cherry pick. And then we have to figure out what to do about our code enforcement, because some of those areas are reluctant to come in because of code. Some of those areas, the biggest barrier are the code. They don't want to live by our codes. They got their boat in the driveway and they don't want to move it, or something like that. So anyhow, there's more work for us to do on that. And that's it from me. Yes.
Comments?
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Thank you for this budget. It was really clear, easy to follow, and thorough. So I really appreciated that. It all made sense. So.
Great, thank you, you're welcome.
Yes, Councilmember Chambers.
Okay, two. One, we talked about maybe having a slide that shows comparative costs when you include stormwater and library millage and stuff like that. That really helps. This year, I don't know if it's that important. I've found over the years that when you're not raising anything, there's less talk about that. But for our future, we need that's a good thing if you could include that. And to answer your question, yes, I'm happy.
Great. Thank you.
That was it.
Good. Gil?
Yes.
Any comments?
No comments. I'm comfortable with
I didn't hear
He said he
him.
was comfortable with what's
Okay.
presented.
Anything else? Yes.
I have the answer on that.
Gil, can you mute again, please? There you go. Thank you.
So we do have the fiscal year '24 payment. We've already made an interest payment. That's the one in the middle of the year. We do have a payment due at the end of the year. It's budgeted in this fiscal year's budget. It's a total of $246,273. At the end of next year, I'll check into it. I think there's a payment penalty, but I'll double check this. But it's not going to change. The interest rate is fixed, so it won't change. We know exactly how much we need to pay for the last payment, which comes in fiscal year '25. And that's the one we have using the unassigned fund balance. We transfer it from general fund into the debt service fund to make that payment using those unassigned fund balance dollars. And then we'll be done with it.
Well, sorta.
We'll be done with
Not paying,
Done
not collecting,
Yeah.
not collecting.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything else?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Council? Anything else? Directors, anything else? That's it? Very good. Gil, any final comments or? Okay. Very good. Thank you to our team. Thank you to all of you. Appreciate the hard work, and we'll stand adjourned.
Okay.